Hello, welcome everybody to another episode of From the Desk of. And tonight it's going to just be me and Gus and Sean, as you can see, for those that are psych fans. And so tonight I'm going to be kind of talking through what the origination of the OCEO program was, kind of the history of it, how did it come about, and then a little bit of the detail. And then I've got somebody here that's going to be doing some interview questions for me, so I can get into more detail as we move forward. So,
all right, James, go ahead and give us just a nice introduction. Why did you start the OCO, and why do you feel it's important for people?
Yeah, I mean, it actually came as a byproduct of about 10 years of my work at Adobe. I've been at, previous to this doing my own thing, I was at Adobe for 10 years. And then prior to that, I was at a company called Omniture for about 5 years. For the last 10 years, I've served as the chief of staff and the business operations lead for the digital experience business. And so it's the other things about Adobe that most people don't know about or don't recognize. So it's not the Photoshop and the InDesign and those guys. It's more on the marketing side. So it's the marketing cloud, the digital marketing cloud, that kind of a thing. So Adobe acquired Omniture back in September of 2009. And then I was there in that role until mid 2019. And since then, I've been doing my own thing. And so the idea behind the OCEO was kind of built upon all the things that we put in place to support the business. So over a 10-year window, the revenue grew from 300 million to 3 billion. And 1,000% growth over that period of time. And, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of long hours. It was like driving in a car at 200 miles an hour with your hair on fire kind of a thing. And there were a lot of things that we had to build on the fly. So the office of the CEO is kind of a system or a program or a process, I guess, that we built over time as we were going through the business. And then as far as the office itself, the office of the CEO is really made up of a few different players, but we'll get into that here in just a second with some of the questions. So.
Awesome. Thank you. We can cut this out here. Do you just want me to read these questions? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So first question, do you have a support team made up of a chief of staff, executive admin, PR lead, and business operations lead?
It's a good question. So the OCEO, the formal office part of it, not the process, but the office part of it, is made up of that. So you've got the CEO or whoever the senior leader is, and then you've got a chief of staff who also does business operations. You then have the executive administrative person. You have the human resources person, and then you have a PR person or somebody who deals with communication and things like that. And so what this office does is it basically, the entire purpose of this office is to make sure that the CEO or the senior leader is successful. So this group of 4 individuals, they manage a calendar, they manage their who's gonna meet when. They're kind of that gatekeeper for people that want to schedule meetings with the CEO, and they basically just do everything they can to make sure that the CEO looks good. In fact, my role, I always joke that my role is basically to always make the CEO look good. And so the role, kind of the example I use is kind of backstage at a play or behind the curtain, pulling the strings and running the lights and things like that to make sure that the senior leader that I work with is successful. And so each of those 4 players have obviously very critical aspects of their role. but that group as a whole meets together. It can be there can be a couple of different hierarchies. They could all four report directly to the CEO, or they could the three of them could report into the chief of staff, and then the chief of staff into the CEO. And so it kind of depends on the preference, but and then obviously the CEO has their direct reports as well. And so it's a pretty important aspect of the business that I think a lot of people don't really take full advantage of.
Great. Do you have? Sorry, I'll pause again. Do you want me to read each of these lines now?
No, just
one at a time.
Yeah, just the questions.
Do you have a running business? Sorry. Help me figure out this question. Do you have a running business?
It's called, do you have a running the business?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, that's okay.
I was like, wait a second. Okay. Do you have a running the business operational model that serves as a clearinghouse for staff meeting agenda items and presenters?
So the running the business model is kind of a subcomponent of the OCEO. And basically what it is it's kind of where staff meetings are managed. It's kind of controlling and kind of being a gatekeeper or a clearinghouse of issues that would normally go to that a lot of people would want to take to the CEO. And so the running the business model is essentially, it's a process that makes sure that staff meetings run effectively. So for example, as the chief of staff, my role was to identify the topics for the agenda. It was also to identify who the presenters would be. I would meet with those presenters in advance and make sure that they have their ducks in a row and they know what they're saying and it makes sense. I'd critique their slides and I'd do some things like that would make it so that they could be successful. And basically, and then during the meeting, I would be kind of the bad cop to the CEO's good cop, right? So I'd be the one that's kind of keeping an eye on the clock, making sure that we're moving forward. I'm the one who will give her a prompter like, hey, you got about 5 more minutes to wrap up. And the whole time during the meeting, I would be sending email or text messages back and forth with the CEO to let them know, hey, we got about 10 more minutes, or, hey, this feels like an important thing. I recommend that we keep going, and then we'll push the next topic to maybe next week, or, something along those lines. And so it became kind of a symbiotic relationship. And so, there were a number of things that happened to determine what those agenda items would be. So for example, in this case, we actually had a 3-hour staff meeting once a week. And so 3 hours seems like a lot of time, but it actually goes very quickly. And it's a great kind of a scenario because we actually borrowed it from Shantanu Narayan, who's the CEO of Adobe. He meets with his senior staff for 3-4 hours every week. And the philosophy behind that is so much of the business itself requires all the different people in that staff to make decisions and really go forward on things. And so to have 3 hours a week to spend together with that core leadership team, there's a lot of discussion and a lot of decisions and that kind of thing that are made as a result of that. And you don't feel like you're having to cram it into like a 30-minute or 1 hour slot. And like I said, we found that we used it every single time. And in many, probably most cases, we were rushed to try and get all of the topics covered. So the running the business model is kind of that whole thing of preparing people, making sure that the time on the agenda and the staff meeting components and that are all running smoothly. And then from there, it's just basically kind of the behind the scenes aspect of running the business, where the idea that the thing I always tried to do was make it seem like no one was running the meeting, but instead having it be seamless and having the CEO or the general manager, in my case, make it feel like he's just running the whole meeting himself. He's talking about different topics. Who do we have up next? That kind of a thing. But it allowed him to be successful and kind of drive that process forward.
Great. Do you have a formal strategic plan that outlines a 3-year view of the business and opportunity, is communicated to the full organization, and is used by the leadership team to focus on the most important priorities?
Yeah. So, a strategic plan is critical. For us, we did a 3-year outlook, and that was what we called our strategic plan. And basically, what we did is it was done over about a week process. So, what would happen is we'd take the leadership team and then a number of people invited from around the company in different groups or organizations, and we would go up to, a resort, a Park City, or Deer Valley or somewhere like that here in Utah, and we would bring everybody up there and kind of spend 3 or 4 days together and basically talk about the business. What are things that are going well? What are things we need to improve? We would look at the previous year's strategic plan and say, last year we thought this was the 3-year runway, but we got to tweak a few things. A lot of times companies like Salesforce or others would make an acquisition that would kind of adjust our model and make it such that we needed to adjust our plan and our process. And so all of these individuals from around the company, key leaders throughout the company, would come into town for those 3 or 4 days, and we would talk about all aspects of the business. And as a byproduct of that, we would flesh out this strategic plan. And so the strategic plan typically was made up of kind of core objectives, things we want to do over the next 3 years. We would do a kind of a budget analysis where we'd say, hey, if we had $100 to spend, where would we put it? And then we'd say, all right, let's put 5,000 of it here and 50,000 of it there, et cetera, et cetera. And it just allowed us to kind of figure out, all right, what are the most critical things that we need to build? What are the most critical processes we need to build as a leadership team? What do we need from those other groups? So having them kind of wining and dining them and bringing them to a beautiful resort like Park City or Deer Valley, they were kind of beholden to us. And so as we went through and talked about all the different plans and locked down all of the different initiatives, by having them there with us, it gave us the ability to kind of get skin in the game from really everybody. And so that when our strategic plan was rolled up and submitted to Shantanu and his ops staff, nothing would be a surprise. People would be, I support that. I was in the meeting. I'm comfortable with that approach. I was able to voice any concerns or problems, that kind of thing. And it just allowed us to kind of put together a plan that would allow us to kind of look out 3 years, and then we would refresh it each time. The other thing we did, which was nice, is that we would do quarterly strategic plan check-ins. So once a quarter, we spend a full day with the leadership team, would invite some of these other key leaders from around the company, and we would sit down for a day and see how things were going. So it was kind of we had the annual formal review, and then we would do these quarterly reviews where we would bring people together for a much shorter time and talk about how things are going. We're a quarter into this plan, or 6 months into this plan. How are things looking? Do we need to make some adjustments or some tweaks? So, and then as a byproduct of all of those discussions, we would create what we called work streams. And so we would identify what are the critical initiatives or things that we need to put together to make this successful. And basically what we did is we assigned individuals, and this is typically not at that C staff level or even at that next level down. These are key leaders, directors, senior directors, et cetera, across the organization that would be accountable for each of the items that kind of came as part of those work streams. And then as my role as chief of staff was to hold everybody accountable on those things, get updates, provide components with our dashboard that we would do and things like that to make sure that things are moving forward as we went.
Great. Do you have an operational plan that outlines a 1-year view of the business, including top priorities that align with and support this strategic plan?
So we talk about the 3-year strategic plan. The 1-year plan, we called it the operational plan, but basically what it was is how do we make the strategic plan for this year? What do we determine is the most critical thing to do in the next 12 months? So what we would do is we would, based on the strategic plan framework, we would identify 5 or 6 categories that we would use. And then from there, we would identify no more than 12 to 15 objectives. And then from there, we would do, we would create, KPIs and put together owners and all that kind of stuff. But basically, the operations plan was, it was a way for the C staff, so Sean New and his team, and the financial people to figure out, okay, here are the initiatives that you want to accomplish this year. Here is your budget, and then it was kind of a back and forth handshake on figuring out what that final budget would be. And there were years where it was like a zero base budget, and so we'd have to go through an exercise of what we would call, what are we going to invest in, what are we going to disinvest in, and then what are we going to reallocate. And so it was a good exercise for the leadership team to go through to really make sure that we're focused on all the right things. And what was interesting is when the teams were going to meet with Sean New, it felt a lot like Shark Tank. In fact, that was the analogy I used whenever we'd prepare people to go and present is, guys, this is Shark Tank. Basically what we're doing is we're presenting our business in such a way that will bring confidence to those individuals that are making those budget decisions. And then basically from that, they would determine, okay, this general manager is going to receive X amount of budget. This one's going to receive Y. There's a little bit of, tug of war back and forth a little bit. But that's basically where we identified, all right, here are the things that we've committed to doing this year. And here are the ways that we're going to determine our success. And so it was the high level, kind of a theme or goal. And then underneath each of those categories was a list of all the objectives that we're going to accomplish. And like I said, we kept it fairly small, like 12, 15 at the very most, no more than 3 per category. And then from there, we had a bunch of KPIs that we would use. And most of the KPIs were at the level of like managers, senior managers, directors, et cetera. And wouldn't necessarily make it onto the formal operations plan, but it was a good way to cascade from the strategic plan down to the operations plan, and then KPIs and objectives and things of that nature. So,
do you have an effective reporting system or an executive dashboard that clearly measures progress for each objective?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think that I guess what I would say is the most important aspect of this Office of the CEO process is the thought or the concept of what is measured improves, and what is measured and reported on improves faster. So basically what that means is we would do the strategic plan at the top, we'd roll into the operations plan, we'd have all the objectives, et cetera, the different categories and then the objectives. And then from there, we would put together very specific KPIs and dates and owners. So we would roll into the new year with really all of that kind of identified and put together. And basically what we did is we created a dashboarding system that would allow all of those leaders, including the CEO, including Sean New, for example, at Adobe, and that dashboard would go out once a week, and it would basically break down our progress with each of those objectives. And there were times when it was, get a little bit bigger, and sometimes it would be smaller, depending on what was going on or what the initiatives were. But it allowed us to give a weekly snapshot of how things are going. And there'd be kind of a dashboard of the dashboard on the front page that would basically kind of highlight all of the critical pieces that we're focused on. And, there was the typical, red, yellow, green marcation that basically would say, here's how we're performing, we're behind or whatever. And then each of those components would have a sub-page where the owner would be listed, the progress towards the objective would be listed, the overall status of the objective. If we're on track, it's green. If we're a little bit behind, it's yellow. If we've got a major block or an outage, it would be red, etc. And so that weekly dashboard would go out. And then on a quarterly basis, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but on a quarterly basis, we would check in on a more formal type of basis where we would look at those objectives and KPIs at a more detailed level. But every week, this dashboard would go out, and it allowed the various leaders within the organization to get a status of not only the business as a whole, but also their individual assigned components, so that when they rolled into staff meetings, what we'd do is we'd send the report out or the dashboard out early in the week. It would give them a day or two to kind of get their thoughts together, and then we would review it during the weekly staff meeting. And a lot of, probably the first hour of every staff meeting was basically walking through the dashboard and saying, all right, what are the critical areas that are missing? What are the things that we need to be concerned with? Do we need to fix this now in this meeting? Do we need to talk about it? Or can we kind of maybe send them out and then come back and report on progress? So the dashboard became a really critical part of just the cadence of having these leaders focus on the right things and keep their teams focused on the right things as well.
Do you have an effective quarterly bonus review process where leaders are accountable to report or present in a live session with the full leadership team?
Yeah, so one of the things, like I said, there's this cascading process, right? So strategic plan would be followed by operations plan. It would then be followed by the kind of the objectives and KPIs and all that kind of stuff. And that was at the kind of the department or division level. And then what would happen is each individual leader would create what we called a plan of record. Basically what it was is it had a slide for the overall company, so Adobe as a whole, for example. And then there was a slide for the digital experience business. And then each of them would have their own slide. So somebody who managed product marketing, for example, they would have a page or two that would identify, these are the things that I'm signing up for this year or for next year. And these are the things I'm going to be held accountable to. These are the things I'm going to report on a regular basis during one-on-ones with the general manager, the CEO. And here are the things that I'm going to report on a quarterly basis in what we used to call quarterly business reviews. So it was a meeting that would allow everybody to come in and kind of do a return and report on their particular stewardship. Things that say, hey, here are the things that are going well, and so it's one of those things where it was really good because it allowed us to really focus on the most critical components, and it was really nice because it basically gave us the ability to hold everyone in the organization accountable, and really it allowed for people to be responsible for their particular business. And one of the really nice things that we did throughout the process was we would take it from the top all the way down to the individual contributor level. So each individual within the organization would put together what we would call a plan of record. And basically everybody would have a set of objectives that supported the overall organization. And then there would be objectives that they would specifically identify, and that they would use those in their one-on-ones with their managers. And there would be a quarterly, more formal kind of one-on-one that would take place after the fact.
Do you have a performance check-in model where all employees receive a comprehensive performance review on a quarterly basis?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that Adobe did very, very well. In fact, probably the best I've ever seen in my career is they did what they call a check-in process. So basically what it was is, as every employee, all the way down to the individual contributor level, would kind of lock in and build their plan of record. And so they knew exactly what their objectives were or what the metrics were to determine their progress and their success. And then basically from there, what we would do is we would use that in our performance reviews. So, for example, I would meet with my team once a week. I'd do a 30-minute just quick check-in with all the different people on my team once a week. And then once a month, I do a little bit more detail, maybe an hour, that we would talk about how things are moving forward. And then on a quarterly basis, we would do a really formal version where we would actually write down plans and things that need to be changed and improved and things like that. And then on an annual basis, in the December time frame typically, we would do the annual review. And one of the nice things that Adobe did is, because it was a public company, there were really a number of different levers that you could pull. One would be, a promotion lever. If somebody's, worked hard and has earned a promotion. There was also a merit increase lever that you could pull, that you could say, hey, you've done really well. Here's 3, 6, 8%, whatever increase per year. And then there was bonus. So there was a bonus plan that you could use to qualify people and really benefit them for the effort that they put in. And then the last one, and this was one that was pretty tightly held, and that was the stock options, or what they call restricted stock units, or RSUs. And so one of the things that Adobe did, which was really good, is they required each of the managers to really spend time with their individual team members throughout the year, so that there was nothing that came as a surprise. So the ideal scenario was that somebody would walk into the performance review, and it would really be more of hey, anything since the last time we met last quarter? No, everything looks good. All right, well, here's my view on it. Here's your view on it. And then we would talk about some of the different components of it. And then we would roll into the compensation discussion. So the most productive and effective managers would be the ones where that final annual review was never a surprise. Both sides felt strongly about the rating and things of that nature, and it allows us to feel like we didn't want anyone to be ambushed or feel like they were out of touch, or that it felt like the manager was bringing something up that happened in January and didn't ever talk about it until December. So it was that process of making sure that people weren't surprised.
Does your organization have a consistent employee feedback process, such as an annual engagement survey, something that where the results are reviewed by a senior leadership team?
Yeah, so another really good thing that Adobe did was they did annual, what they called engagement surveys, and they would typically stagger it. So they would do every quarter. They would do one quarter of the company, right? So this email would go out, and it's basically a survey that they would use to say, how do you feel about the overall company direction? How do you feel about your division? How do you feel about the objectives that you individually have? What are what degree of engagement do you feel like you have to move the dial, or to contribute to the overall success of the company? What are your feelings about your current managers? What are your feelings about their managers? What are your feelings about the high-end kind of ops staff or C-level management team and that? So it wasn't like 50 questions, but it was probably 8 to 10 questions that basically the intent behind it was to find out how engaged the employee base was on a regular basis. And so everybody would receive the survey once a year. They would do it quarterly, just so that they don't have to wait 12 months to get feedback. And it was a great way to kind of see how various groups are being led. It gave a really good opportunity for leaders or managers to get feedback on their management style, and get feedback in terms of things that they can do differently and improve. And so it was a great way to just kind of get a pulse, or it's an engagement status of how people were feeling about the company and about their own individual contribution to the overall process.
Great. And then if someone came across your site or wanted to reach out to you, what would you tell them is the main reason you want them to consider you and to trust you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've been in the enterprise software industry since 1987, so it feels like a long time ago. But I started fairly early in my career. I was still quite young, and so for the past 30 years or so, I've been in that space, and so I've seen pretty much everything. I've been in most departments within a company. I think the only department I haven't spent time in was HR and finance. But I worked with finance people and HR people throughout that period of time, and so so I guess what I would say is I've been a part of a lot of different organizations. I've seen a lot of different companies come and go, but I've also been at companies for a long time. So when I started, I was with WordPerfect, and then there was a merger with Novell, and combined between those two companies, I was there for 12 years. And then, as I mentioned, when I was with Omniture and then Adobe, I was there for another 15 years. So, and then a couple of things in between where I did a couple startups and that didn't start, as they say. And so there's not a lot that I haven't seen. There's very few things that I haven't experienced. There's very few things that I haven't had success with. And, like I said, over the past 10 years, I managed all the operational execution from a business perspective for a business that grew from 300 million to 3 billion over that 10-year period, which it was phenomenal growth. I was blessed to be a part of it, but I had a big part to play in it. And like I said, a lot of my work was behind the curtains, but without an effective OCEO type of structure, leaders really struggle and organizations really struggle to be successful.